Today on The Quad, star co-hosts and analysis about what's going on in the north of Israel. A really wonderful interview with expert Jonathan Spire and your favorite, Scumbags and Heroes. Only on The Quad, only on JNS. Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of The Quad on JNS TV. And here in the studio with some fantastic co-hosts. Firstly, Shoshanna Keats Jaskoll, who is our now permanent co-host and the founder of Chokhmat Nashim, Women's Wisdom, fighting exclusion of women in orthodox spaces and elevating women's voices. Aviva Klompas, activist, author, and the co-founder of Boundless, fighting anti-Semitism in education. And of course, our wonderful Shirel Liberman, who is also the founder of Shift, a women's impact network, also public diplomacy. And so really a wonderful, wonderful panel here today for all of you. And how can we not, ladies, talk about the very obvious this week, and that is, we've shifted. Are we at war with the North? I think the answer to that is yes. We have a lot to unpack here. Let's start with the alleged explosion of many male body parts by Israel last week with Hezbollah, very targeted, very deliberate, and probably years in the making. And really the question is, how come when Israel actually very deliberately targets only terrorists, somehow we're still the bad guys? Aviva, you're out there in the front of this media war, literally one of our best warriors. How do you interpret this?
Well, I think after 11 and a half months of watching this war, I can conclusively say that it is a mixture of ignorance and idiocy.
Yes.
It's pretty clear that the IDF went and targeted terrorist communication devices held by terrorists, used by terrorists for terrorist purposes, and that you could not imagine a more targeted and precise strike.
Okay, so why is absolutely no one seeing that? Why are people like AOC calling this a crime against humanity? I mean, idiocy?
It's the same people who all along throughout this war have made a case that Israel has no right to defend itself. They're the same people that are not so much interested in seeing the creation of a Palestinian state as seeing the destruction of an Israeli state.
Absolutely. I think that probably is the conclusion of the media war that we're in. Thank you. Now I know why you're the queen of it. Okay, Shoshanna.
Wrapped up for us in a bow.
Shoshanna, did we have the right to celebrate on Thursday and Friday?
Now you're asking me the ethical question.
Of course,
Now I have to give you the ethical answer. So my answer is when evil goes down, it is a cause for celebration for the forces of good.
Yeah.
100%. It is always tragic when innocent civilians are caught up. But I have to say this precise, incredible, targeted attack had such low numbers of what is it called?
Collateral damage.
Thank you. Had such low numbers of casualties. Collateral damage. That was the thing.
Yes.
And so therefore, I think is a celebration of Israel's determination to only go after the bad guys. And when we succeed, that is absolutely cause for celebration. It's a beautiful thing when we can see evil in front of us, take it out in the best way possible.
And I think that also when we succeed, the haters and detractors, they go nuts.
They can't handle it.
They can't handle it. Shirel, what do you think about everything that's going on and what happened a few days ago and what continues to happen?
Well, I think, I'm sorry to say, but it's about freaking time that it happened. I think we've reached a point where we couldn't just sit still, and this operation was allegedly planned months ago and now been executed. And I think it was a beautiful operation, and it was exactly the demonstration of the Israeli force, including the Israeli humanity of not targeting other people. Like you see in the videos of the explosions of the beepers or walkie-talkies or whatever, you see nearby women and stuff, they are unharmed, okay? So it was literally targeting the only people who are actually involved, and I think it was a great operation, and I think we've reached a point where we have to start defending ourselves and getting the people back.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's 2024, people. If you have a beeper, you're either a drug dealer or a terrorist. So let's talk about what's happened since, because we're at war, okay? So we've apparently eliminated half of the launch sites, half of the rockets. There's still another half, is still 75,000 to 100,000 rockets.
Yeah.
We're not out of this yet. The capabilities of Hezbollah is way ahead of the capabilities of Hamas. And I'm beginning to kind of note in the music of what we hear that maybe the Lebanese are thinking, hey, is this our moment to get rid of Hezbollah? Could this be an opportunity? I want to remind everybody again that on the 8th of October, Hezbollah purposefully started attacking the north, and 70,000 evacuees, internal refugees of our own country, are not living in their homes. Farms have been destroyed, homes have been destroyed. And the reason why we don't have 100,000 dead in the north is because we evacuated them, because they've been at war with us from the 8th of October. Not clear why. There's no territorial claim anywhere. As far as we know, they can invent Bekaa Valley, this or that, but ultimately there's no territorial claim except for the claim that they want to destroy the state of Israel. And Israel has always wanted to live at peace with its neighbors, and Lebanon was once a peaceful, more or less, country. And maybe there's an opportunity now to kick Hezbollah out. And we have to look at really our history with Lebanon and what their involvement and Hezbollah's involvement in Syria. How many people died in Syria? How much carnage there was in Syria? Of course, nobody talks about that. It's only about the terrorists that we killed. And Aviva, you just wrote a great book, which I had the pleasure of reading very recently. And in one of the chapters in your book is all about how Israel has, done incredible work in international development and helping countries less fortunate than us as a cultural thing, even from the beginning of the state of Israel. But there's a very interesting chapter, which I think is relevant to our discussion today, which is the work that Israel did to save injured Syrians during the civil war in Syria, which Hezbollah was very much part of killing innocent people. And of course, the world forgot about that, does not talk about that. Hollywood stars are not worried about that. But Aviva, tell us a little bit, because you did quite a bit of research in this. And I think that chapter really illustrates our relationship with our northern neighbors and what we've always tried to do here.
That's certainly true today, but it's also true from the very beginning. And right now, so often we're thinking about how much longer and how much more are we going to have to endure. And for me, it's helpful to look back at Israel's history to get a sense of where we are and where we could be headed. And what's so astounding to me is that Israel in its earliest days, there's a lot of shadows of what it looks like today, under attack from many neighbors, vilified in the international community, finding itself increasingly isolated, economically, under legal attack, and so on. And from the very beginning, from Israel's founding, it decided that it wanted to be engaged with the world. It had every right to be insular and to say, with everything that we're dealing with, we need to take care of ourselves. But in Israel's Declaration of Independence, it's very clear. It says we extend our hand in friendship to the nations of the world, to the surrounding Arab nations, and to Jewish people all around the world to be a part of this project. Not everybody has taken Israel up on the offer, but that has always been the ethos. And that's been no different, even though Israel is surrounded by countries that don't recognize its legitimacy, including Syria, as you said. So the Syrian civil war begins in 2010. Yeah. There is a brutal repression on the part of Assad. It creates instability and chaos in the country, which
Hezbollah is involved, doing Iran's bidding.
So you see that there's many radical Islamic groups that take advantage of the chaos. So you have Al-Qaeda, you have ISIS spanning across Iraq and Syria, and they move into the border where Syria and Israel meet. And Israel's watching nervously. Now, we don't have a peace treaty with Syria, but it's been a sort of tentative calm for many years. And you don't want ISIS on your border, understandably. And the fighting is going on. And from time to time, there would be injured Syrians that would come to the border with Israel looking for help. And the IDF patrols that went by would throw over medical supplies, whatever the case might be. And then there was one night in February 2013, where 7 Syrians came to the border desperate for help. 70% of Syria's doctors had fled. The infrastructure was devastated. There was no medical facilities. There's no electricity, and people were desperate for help. And that one particular IDF commander decided on the spot he was going to allow them in and get them treatment in Israel. He did. They were returned to Syria, and then word spread, and more Syrians were coming to the border. Some were injured in war, but some was a snake bite or an allergic reaction or a woman in labor. And Israel started to realize something had to be done about this. And they went to a man by the name of Eyal Dror, and they asked him to lead a mission called Operation Good Neighbor. And it was make a plan for what we're going to do to help Syrians. And he was originally tasked with assisting Syrians about 1 to 2 kilometers from the border. And there was nothing in place. He had to build it from the ground up. And he says he went to his office the first day. There was nothing there, not even a computer. He had to build a team and infrastructure. So he started to do this, and then he gets together humanitarian goods, and they deliver it across the border to the Syrians. And what happens? It's burnt. They destroy it.
Who?
The Syrians.
The Syrians
they won't
destroy
accept
Israel's medical help.
And humanitarian.
The actual Syrians who came to the border asking for help?
Well, so here's what happened is that there's a fatwa put out that says you can't accept help from the Israelis. You'd be a collaborator. You don't take help from the enemy, and there's fear, and there's distrust. Generations of Syrians that have been raised to believe that Israel is evil.
Yeah.
And so Eyal realizes he has to make a plan, and he starts to work, and it's really about networking and relationships on the Syrian side. And ultimately, he finds a Christian charitable organization and a Muslim charitable organization. And the three of them together build a partnership that eventually becomes the basis for Operation Good Neighbor. And they find relationships on the other side, and they build enough trust such that a year later, took a whole year, they were able to start sending a lot of goods into the Syrian side. And instead of 1 to 2 kilometers from the border, they were helping as far as 40 kilometers away.
I mean, if that doesn't really explain to people that Israel has only ever wanted quiet borders, peace, and a thriving region, including with our own enemies who are trying to kill us, I mean, I don't know what does. So in 1948, 1967, 1973, our enemies were all the countries that surrounded Israel that wanted Israel's destruction. There was no territorial claims. It was, we want to get rid of you. It was Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. And today, that's been replaced by militia groups, extremist militia groups, fundamentalist jihadi militia groups, funded by the Islamic Republic of Iran. But it's the same story. We're surrounded by people who are not looking for territorial compromises. They're looking to destroy the state of Israel. And what do we do with our power and influence? We help people when they're in need, and that really is the difference. So let's talk about the fact that we're at war. Apparently, we've destroyed half of the rocket capabilities of Hezbollah. And I'm thinking to myself, do you think that Nasrallah is thinking to himself, I think I shouldn't have started on the 8th of October because his entire military infrastructure is gone. I mean, in terms of the generals and all his people. And we've destroyed half of their capabilities. Who forced him, or did anybody encourage him? Was it Sinwar? Was it the Islamic Republic saying to him, get in this war, let's try and see? Shirel, or was this like a real miscalculation? What do you think he's thinking?
Well, I really hope he's now thinking it's a miscalculation because he messed with the wrong people and he's getting screwed. I don't really,
not in a good way.
I don't know what he's thinking. I do know they are so extremist in the point where they praise death. So I don't know if they're actually, he's actually thinking to himself, oh, maybe I shouldn't have started because so many people have died.
No, not about people. I'm talking about his military infrastructure. We've really hit them hard.
We've really hit them hard, and we will keep hitting them hard. I want to believe that he wants to end this before it gets worse, but we do have to understand that he is a proxy of the Islamic regime and many other terrorist countries like Qatar and stuff like that, things that could fund him again and again. So I don't know if he really thinks it was a miscalculation that he lost that much capabilities. He probably thinks to himself, okay, so we are at war. We will continue until the bitter end, whatever it is, and then we will rebuild and continue this war the same way they did after 2006.
Absolutely. They rebuilt the wall. But even then he said that he thought it was a miscalculation to go into that war. And I think the losses that now they've had are much worse.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm giving the guy too much credit.
You're definitely giving him too much credit. I think that Nasrallah, because I know him so well, I think that Nasrallah is a puppet of the Islamic regime of Iran, and he has a suicide mission, a literal suicide mission. I don't think he cares one iota for who's dead and whether that's a military personnel or whether it's children. I mean, the IDF is making phone calls and sending on the radio. Yes. If you are a civilian, leave this area. Leave this area. You can see it. I watched it with my own eyes. I don't speak Arabic, but I know people who do. We are trying to save the Lebanese civilians. We are trying to not destroy Lebanon. I don't think Nasrallah cares at all. I think his wish is to die as a martyr, and I hope we give it to him.
I hope we help them in that endeavor. And the question really is, Aviva, is there a chance for Lebanon, do you think, now, to kind of get themselves out of the grip of Hezbollah, or are they just too big and entrenched for that to happen?
So let me just go back to the previous point, because I think it's a real 50-50 moment for Nasrallah. He's watching as his communication infrastructure was decimated. His leadership has been decimated. He's at the top of the food chain.
Yeah.
And he has to be thinking to himself, right now, my days are numbered. And so there's a choice to be made. If I'm going to die as a quote unquote martyr, go for broke. What have I got to lose? Or it's live to fight another day, meaning let this end. Let me get the chance for Iran to be able to resupply, refinance, rebuild my arms. And I think that's the question at the moment, is exactly what's going to happen. And one of the decisive points is what the Lebanese people try to do. Hezbollah has hijacked their country.
Yeah.
What should really be a beautiful country on the Mediterranean is a forward operating base of Iran. And the Lebanese people have a choice to be made. I mean, Hezbollah is in their parliament. They've taken over swaths of the country. They're hiding weapons and ammunitions in their homes. And they're not a people without agency.
They seem to be.
They seem to, but I think that's a lot about how the West is looking at the Arab world, that somebody else has to save them, be it Rashida Tlaib or AOC.
Yes.
And as you say, the Israelis are willing to do more for the civilians than their own people seem to be. But at what point do we say there's an expectation on you? This is your country. What is the future that you want for your own children? And where are the voices that are going to step forward, that are going to be brave enough to make that happen?
Yeah. You're beginning to hear those voices. That gives me a little bit of hope. You hear more about it. I believe there's less repression than there was in Gaza, or that there is in Gaza. It feels like watching the Arab media in Lebanon, there are people saying, this is our moment. They brought this on us. They brought this war on us. Let's do something about it. The question is now about the West. Are the West going to actually be helpful, or they're just going to, turn their backs the way that Obama did in Syria and let other unsavory actors, sweep in? And maybe there's a chance. Maybe this is that pivotal moment. We can only pray. And again, Israel has only ever wanted to live in peace with our neighbors from the north. I've met so many wonderful Lebanese people. We had here Rohan Osman last week, who is Syrian Lebanese, who is, as she calls herself, a recovered anti-Semite, who was taught from the minute she was born that all of the problems were Israel. But maybe this is a chance for a reawakening. And maybe that's what we have to pray for. Thank you for that wonderful discussion, ladies.
Thank you.
So earlier today, we had the chance to talk to a real expert on the north, on Syria, Lebanon, a man who is not just a researcher, a journalist, but also was down in the trenches as an IDF reservist, but also as a journalist living in these countries, Jonathan Spyer. And now we're very honored to have on our show an incredible analyst. He is the director of research for the Middle East Forum. He is a seasoned journalist who's been walking around Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq through the worst of the wars in the region. I'm really happy to have with us here on the Quad, Jonathan Spyer. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Fleur.
Jonathan, you're one of those people that is my guru for everything North. And so I want to start with the most basic of all questions. Why on earth did Hezbollah on the 8th of October decide to go to war with Israel?
October 8th was part of a more general partial mobilization by Iran of a number of regional assets in support of Hamas in Gaza, and Hezbollah on October 8th was the first manifestation. But of course, there is a deeper level to this, because it brings us to the question, okay, but do these movements simply take orders from Iran? Does Iran just sort of flick a switch and then they all roll into action? Both they and indeed Islamic Republic of Iran, I think, considered that Israel would not enter into a very long war against Hamas in Gaza. Their wrong but very deeply held analysis of Israeli society, as you know well, is that Israel is a kind of soft society hidden behind a sort of artificial iron wall, so to speak.
Like liberal, lazy.
That's it, exactly. And therefore it wouldn't have the stomach to sustain the casualties inherent in a long, extended entry into Gaza. I think many people on that side also thought, not entirely erroneously, that Israeli society would be immensely affected by the taking of hostages.
Which it is.
Which it is. But what they, I think, wrongly concluded was as a result of that sensitivity to the issue of the lives of hostages, Israel would be prevented from a major operation into Gaza. And therefore, Hezbollah, I think, calculated that it could afford to have a kind of partial mobilization on behalf of Hamas, so that when the thing was rapidly concluded in their favor, as they assumed it would be, or in Hamas's favor, they'd be able to say, well, you see, once again, we didn't let our brothers down. We were there when we were needed without paying a particularly high price.
Was this a miscalculation for them? What are they thinking right now? I mean, Hassan Nasrallah has got zero command structure left.
Yeah, on the one hand, you can say it was perhaps a miscalculation. I do think they did not expect the extent of losses they are now suffering. And of course, it isn't over by any means yet. On the other hand, however, I do think that it would have been difficult for Iran and its various components and allies to have maintained the notion of the axis of resistance, which is very, very important to Iran's regional strategy, had there not been a mobilization of some kind. The whole thing, had Hamas simply been left to fight and suffer from Israel by itself, then people would have turned around afterwards and said, well, don't ever talk about the axis of resistance and this nonsense again, because Hamas got into trouble and you guys just left them to hung them out to dry. So to some degree, yes, there's been a very high cost to this. On the other hand, however, I think Hezbollah and indeed Iran behind them couldn't really have done much less, so to speak, than they did. And this, I think, is important to bear in mind, because it feeds into analysis not only of the past, but also of the present and the future in the following sense. If anybody thinks that Lebanese Hezbollah and the Revolutionary Guards Corps behind it will take lightly the notion of coming to a separate agreement now, in spite of the things they've absorbed in recent days, they should think very carefully about that, because they should understand to do so would hit at the very basic strategic assumptions that lie behind Iranian regional policy and Lebanese Hezbollah as an element of that.
Where's Iran in all this? Do you think Iran thinks that maybe Hamas went too far, they overplayed their hand? Well, where are they in all of this?
So the Iranians did not, it would appear, order October 7th, which means they don't feel an absolute commitment or responsibility to it. Yes, they have mobilized partially, as we said, their various regional components in support of Hamas. They have not sort of put all the cards on the table. They've not said, okay, we're going all out now. This is the big war as a result of October 7th. The Iranians are very keen on, to put it cynically, fighting to the last Arab, or at least to the last non-Persian. They're quite happy to fight to the last Afghan Shia or Pakistani Shia as well. But the whole notion of this resistance axis, to some degree, is to project power whilst not bringing Islamic Republic of Iran itself or its people into the direct line of fire. I don't think they enjoyed what happened earlier this year in terms of direct targeting and then them direct response. Iran is backing its proxies. Iran is doing its very best to keep itself out of the direct line of fire. And my sense is that the recent remarks by Pezeshkian, the new Iranian president, reflect that broader perspective.
But isn't their end game? You talked earlier about the big war.
Yeah.
So in a way, they feel that it's gone a bit too far. They want to kind of rein in their proxies because they want to save this.
Yeah.
What are they saving this for?
The strategy, as we're describing it, has actually been doing very well.
For them?
Yeah, and has been producing dividends for the Iranians. I would say pretty much since two very major, not necessarily connected events in the Middle East. Firstly, the United States invasion of Iraq in 2003, and secondly, the events of the Arab Spring, and specifically in the context of interest to us in Iraq and in Syria. That's to say, these events in invasion of Iraq and the Arab Spring caused the weakening or collapse or fragmentation of a large number of regimes and governments in the Arabic-speaking world. It is the Iranians and their proxy strategy who have emerged as the main beneficiaries. Their methods have enabled them in all those countries to insert a kind of deep state of their own into those countries, which ends up, in all cases, which we mentioned, being either as strong or stronger than the official state itself. Now, it was all going pretty well. Part of the rationale of that, for it to continue going well, is you mustn't turn the temperature up too high, because then powers that are conventionally much more powerful than the Iranians see what's happening and feel the need to respond. You don't want that, because as we've seen graphically demonstrated in Lebanon in recent days, when it comes to the issue of conventional military capacities, whether it's in the field of intelligence or in the field of air power or in the field of conventional military capacity on the ground, so they can do what they're doing, for example, in Iraq at the present time, where they are simply slowly, day by day, absorbing the Iraqi state. But the thing is that for that to continue happening, the victims, so to speak, mustn't know that it's happening. For that, you need to keep things quiet. Things like October 7th, October 8th, and what's been happening in the last few weeks in Lebanon don't fit in with that scenario or that stratagem.
What needs to happen? I mean, do they want the renewal of this nuclear agreement? Do they? What is going on in New York right now with their charm offensive? Are they just trying to keep everybody at bay so they can continue to, as you say, quietly work their proxies to their evil aims? Are their aims Middle East? Are their aims beyond the Middle East? Do they work out of a religious fundamentalist fervor, or is that just a show?
No, I don't think it's just a show. I think that the Islamic Republic of Iran is absolutely an ideological regime. I think that the intention, as you mentioned, is first of all to replace what we used to call the United States-led security architecture in the Middle East. It may be a bit optimistic to still use that term, but you know that architecture they are in the process of replacing. If we think of the map of the region, between the Islamic Republic of Iran border with Iraq and the Mediterranean Sea are three notional countries, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Iran is essentially the dominant force right now in all three of those countries, which means at the present time, should Iran wish to transport a military unit or a piece of equipment from Iran itself, from Tehran itself, let's say, to the border with Israel or to the Mediterranean Sea, there is no force in any of those countries that can effectively stand against them. So this project is already quite advanced, and the Iranians are certainly keen on continuing to advance it.
And where do you see the moderate Sunni countries, some of them who already made peace with Israel through the Abraham Accords, and of course Saudi that was on its way to making peace with Israel until this all happened, and good chance that they want to continue with that because they want a defense pact with the United States. Do we have a chance here?
So the sense is that the Gulf Arab countries are very weak. If a determined resistance to the Iranians is being put up in the region, then yes, we can expect them to get behind it. But if they feel isolated, they, as we are now seeing in practice, will seek to accommodate the Iranian challenge. And certainly I think with United Arab Emirates and Israel, who see things very, very similarly in terms of strategic analysis in so many ways, there is a difference, though, of the order of importance of enemies. The enemies are pretty much the same. But whereas for Israel, Islamic Republic of Iran and its various proxies will be seen as the number one enemy, and then Sunni political Islam, the Muslim Brothers, number two or three. In the Emirati case, it's kind of the other way around. They would tend to see Sunni Islamism as the main challenge and the Iranians as, to some degree, a secondary challenge. See an example, for example, of the way in which the Emiratis today are trying hard to revive the fortunes of the Assad regime in Syria. Because as far as they were concerned, the main challenge really there was the Syrian uprising, which was, of course, a Sunni Islamist uprising.
Of course.
From the Israeli calculation, things would be seen quite differently.
That's really very interesting, because in our case, I guess, we have Shia Islamism supporting Sunni Islamism, and they see it from a different perspective as two different enemies. And for us, really,
the Iranian regime has a long history of supporting Sunni political Islam. We shouldn't have any mistake about that. Up to and including, by the way, supporting and harboring members of the Al-Qaeda organization, which is itself actually very, very anti-Shia. So it's not that they can't support or won't support Sunni groups. They will. But at the same time, if we look at the main components of the Iran-led regional alliance today, the only Sunni element actually of note is the Palestinians, is Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Everybody else is either Shia of one kind or another. The Houthis are a different kind of Shia to the Iranians, but one or another. Or, as in the case of Bashar Assad, at least non-Sunni Muslims.
Non-Sunni,
non-Sunni. So the alliance, not because the Iranians even like it that way, but because most of the people who are willing to draw close to them actually tend to be non-Sunnis for obvious reasons, they have ended up building a largely Shia alliance. So yes, Israel finds itself in the almost unique situation of facing organizations that are both Iranian clients, I wouldn't say proxies, but Iranian clients, and Sunni. But most of the time, if you look at the Iranian centers of power, whether it's Lebanon or Yemen or Syria or Iraq, they're aligned with non-Sunni forces, usually against local Sunni enemies.
That's really interesting. Jonathan, I read one thing that you wrote about Jordan's role in all of this, and how they're kind of the country, even though they claim to be stopping it, is really acting as a conduit, or at least a pathway for Iran to support forces in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, of Palestinians. I'm assuming Hamas in this case. Just elucidate us a little bit of what's going on over there through the Jordanian side.
What's going on is that a quite extensive smuggling path has been carved out. What the Iranians appear to be trying to do, and it's kind of smart from their point of view, is just to make the West Bank or Judea and Samaria awash with weaponry. They're not trying to build a hierarchical paramilitary structure. What they want to do is they want to make weaponry available, and then groups of young men can come together in a kind of at an ad hoc basis, get access to the weaponry and carry out attacks. And we saw that to create chaos, and to create chaos and then to extend that chaos as far into Israel as they can, using young, disaffected West Bankers as the instrument for that. And we saw that prior to October 7th last year, if you remember.
The Lion's Den.
Yeah, Lion's Den in Nablus and the Jenin Battalion in Jenin were examples of these kind of rapidly gathered, rapidly dismantled groups of young men. Now, where's the weaponry coming from? The weaponry is coming into the West Bank largely from Jordan. And what we're seeing is that managed by the way, by Hezbollah, Lebanese Hezbollah, and by the IRGC from Lebanon through Syria, and then with the assistance of smuggling families on the borders, who are Sunni Arabs themselves and who are interested in making money, of course, rather than any ideological commitment. With their assistance, the weaponry comes through into Jordan and then into the West Bank. An interesting thing to note is that it's the same smuggling families and to some degree even the same smuggling routes which are being used to transfer drugs.
These are drugs that Hezbollah is trading in. It emanates from Hezbollah?
Hezbollah and the Assad regime.
And the Assad regime
is many things, but also what it's become, what it may well be on the way to becoming, is the Levant's first example of a narco state.
God.
It's a major Captagon production and sale of Captagon pills is a major source of revenue for Assad regime, which of course is short of money and needs all the money that it can get. So so we're noticing this. Now, with regard to the Jordanians, it's not, of course, that Jordan is in any way complicit with this. The Jordanians don't want this, because at the end of the day, the main victim of this, or one of the main victims of this, is Jordanian sovereignty.
Absolutely.
If the Iranians are running and Hezbollah, are running smuggling rings all the way through Jordan, that means that Jordan is not entirely in control of its territory. And that's a situation which I think, in everybody's interests, needs to be addressed.
Where do you see the points of light?
Well, I think the main point of light, if we think again of the events of recent days and the last couple of weeks, what we see is that when it comes to confrontation, when it comes to a real challenge, our side, so to speak, Israel, but also its allies, are vastly outweigh the capacities of the enemy. The second issue, which I think is no less significant in the longer term, the end result for that country will be decline and eventual collapse. The money that used to come from the Gulf, the money that used to come from the West in terms of tourism, in terms of investments, has all vanished. And what you're left with is kind of Hezbollah standing on top of a pile of rubble, and claiming victory. And that's a pretty good, I think, example of what this alliance actually has to offer the region. And in the longer term, that is not obviously an attractive, sustainable proposition. So they have absolutely nothing to propose to the peoples of the region and to the emergent generations in the region.
Well, we hope that brings us to a point where people will actually want a better future for themselves, rise up against these horrible repressive regimes that have ruined their country. And maybe round the corner, perhaps a new Middle East. Jonathan, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fleur.
And now, ladies, for the part in our week that we look forward to, dream about, and really save all our anger for. Our husbands should be very, very pleased.
Truly.
We're saving the aggression for this segment of the show. Scumbags of the week, Shirel, as a newbie on the show. Let's start with you, my dear.
Oh,
Who is
okay.
your scumbag this week?
My scumbag this week is the Diesel bookstore in Brentwood, Santa Monica, that put in their bestseller, shelf, ironically, next to Kamala Harris's book, they put Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters, a book that claims that Hamas is allegedly a terrorist organization that are being dehumanized.
Bad branding, is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah. We're branding Hamas as a terrorist organization, leaving out the fact that they are a designated terrorist organization.
But in fact, they're what, Shirel? What do they think they are?
They think they're a movement, they're a resistant movement. And we saw a video of this week where a very brave young lady came in and told them, why are you putting this book here? And like, I know many people who have died on October 7. Why are you considering rape as resistance? And that vendor had absolutely nothing to say but, oh, do you agree that Israel kills Palestinians? Like, they have no idea.
That's supporting terrorism.
That's not supporting terrorism to know what it is.
I read the book.
Where's the book about understanding Israelis or understanding Israel? We have that, actually. Where? Why is it on the table with all that political?
Where's Noah Tishby's book? You are putting targets on our backs. When are you going to wake up? How many more dead Jews do you need?
How many more dead Palestinians?
I don't want any Palestinians dead. I don't want any more Palestinians dead.
The thing that bothers me the most is that by putting this book so close and so out there and so publicly, like, bestseller thing, they are actually legitimizing the prosecution of Jews, because that is exactly what's going on afterwards, because they are normalizing Hamas as a movement. And then you see all the protests in the camps because they are relying on such books as an example.
So this bookshop is your scumbag of the week?
Yes.
I think
Diesel Bookstore has to, step up, people, step up.
Absolutely. Well, great scumbag. Thank you, Shirel.
Agreed.
Shoshana?
My scumbag is very much in line with what we were talking about earlier with Hezbollah and the terrorists who were, let's just say, departed from their man parts last week. My scumbags are actually the fathers who leave their beepers, the Hezbollah beepers, where their children can get hurt by it. If you're going to be a terrorist, stay away from your kids. If you're going to be a terrorist, don't have kids. Just go be a terrorist by yourself and don't put innocent, wonderful people at risk. Because when Israel comes for you, and we will, the people around you are going to get hurt. So don't do it.
If you're a decent dad.
If you're a decent father, you're a decent scumbag.
Decent person.
Decent father, not a scumbag. Keep your terrorist instruments away from your kids.
Agreed.
And I think that's a fantastic warning, actually, and a fantastic scumbag. Okay, my scumbag has kept me up at night already. Here we go. All right, you all know that I'm a Spanish speaker, so I'm very sensitive to what's going on in the Spanish-speaking world. So there's a guy who's an actor. You may have heard of him. He's been in very big movies, called Javier Bardem.
Of course.
He is married to Penelope Cruz.
Oh, I know. I know she is.
A secondary scumbag, but let's focus on her husband, Javier Bardem. Javier gets a prize for being an actor. And when he gets up on stage, he said, my celebration is marred by the fact that Israel is committing war crimes in Gaza.
Lo que está sucediendo en Gaza es totalmente inadmisible, es terrible, es deshumanizante. Creo que el gobierno de Israel es un gobierno el gobierno más radical que ha tenido la historia de Israel, que está cometiendo crímenes contra la humanidad, que está cometiendo crímenes en el derecho internacional. Creo que la sociedad está empezando a entender que el derecho legítimo a la crítica a cualquier gobierno o Estado nada tiene que ver con, en este caso, la falsa acusación de antisemitismo, o en el caso de que uno critique Hamas, que debe criticar y condenar las acciones terribles de islamofobia.
He says that October 7th is not an excuse for Israel to commit genocide, which is what I'm hearing this a lot. So first of all, he completely ignores the massacre and doesn't really care about the victims of that massacre, the women who were raped, the babies who were burned. He doesn't talk at all, of course, about the hostages who are still in those tunnels, suffering tremendously. We can't even begin to imagine that suffering. He doesn't talk at all about the fact that Hamas is using its own people as their defense strategy, putting them in front of themselves, even when Hamas families, even when families in Gaza are saying, please, Hamas, why are you now coming to the humanitarian zone and putting us at risk? He doesn't mention any of that. And he says, and this is not about anti-Semitism. So the first thing I want to say is, you know, there's an expression in French, qui s'excuse, s'accuse. In English, we would say, the gentleman does protest too much. Why do you have to mention that this is not about anti-Semitism, Javier? Maybe because it is. And I think that much of the problem in the world is that people don't really understand what anti-Semitism is. And the IRA definition, which is something everybody should be adopting, has really researched the origins of anti-Semitism, how anti-Semitism come about, and came up with something, Javier, that you don't know about. And that is that double standards, when you hold the Jewish people or the Jewish country in a different standard, when you expect a Jewish country not to defend itself, not to go and try and get their people, not to try and secure their borders, not to try and eliminate an existential threat, when you are saying to the Jewish people, you have no right of self-defense, but everybody around the world does, that is double standards. And that is anti-Semitism. So you can protest as much as you want that this is not about anti-Semitism, but you, in fact, are an anti-Semite, because that is what anti-Semitism actually is. And so I know you're an actor, but please go out, read a book, educate yourself. And most of all, para de ser un hipócrita, porque eso es lo que eres. Si no te importó de los niños en Siria, si no te importó de los niños en Sudán, pero esto es lo único que te importa, eres un hipócrita y un antisemita. You're my scumbag of the week, Javier Bardem. Oh, I really was stewing about this for days. Wow. Okay. So, because we...
Now that you've got that off your chest.
And in Spanish, I'm...
And the Spanish is like, the blood is boiling.
When you're a Latina, the Spanish are way more aggressive, yeah. Just saying, ask my husband.
I'm inching away.
Okay, we have to end up on good vibes.
Yes.
And the good vibes is our heroes of the week. Yeah. And so, Shoshanna,
my hero.
Please give us some good vibes.
I have a heroine. I am so proud of this woman.
Yes.
That you could see the smile. It's like coming out of me.
The nachas.
Supposedly, the brain behind the beeper initiative was a 20-year-old woman in the intelligence.
Yes.
We always talk about how important it is that women be around the table, talking about making decisions, thinking creatively.
Always.
And I feel like this is such an excellent example of this. She's thinking, how do we do maximum damage to the infrastructure, but minimum damage to the people around who are not involved? And she comes up with this concept of blowing up their beepers. Either they're looking at it or it's sitting over here. But as we mentioned before, it's only that person really who gets harmed. And so I want to say you are my heroine for being a creative thinker, for thinking of how to do maximum damage, but also minimal damage. And I pray that there are many more like you who come to our aid, to the Jewish state, and who bring your intelligence, your creativity, your thought, and your compassion, as women do, to help us win this war once and for all against the evil of the Islamic Jihad, the Iranian regime, Hamas, Hezbollah, and everyone else who's in line to harm us. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
So imagine that she came up with the most brilliant.
It's like an operation that's been going on. Like it's not only the beeper thing. It's like,
and it
has a lot behind it.
Oh, it was brilliant.
Brilliant.
The fake
the shell companies.
It's a sophistication
it's like a movie.
With no, totally. And I think movies will be made about this operation.
And the fact that we don't even know her name, and she's done such good work for her country.
A heroine for all of us.
Allegedly. That is, you know, I'm also beaming with pride. Beaming with feminist pride for this woman, whoever she is, God bless you. Okay, Shirel, who's your hero?
Yes, so I have a heroine as well. My heroine is a woman called Liat Cohen Raviv. Liat is a Metula resident who was forced to evacuate from her house, from her home, about almost a year ago, along with her family and many others of the North, almost 100,000 civilian citizens. But she decided that she won't sit still and wait for something to happen. She founded a movement called Matspinim, which now has about 2,000 members. committed to create operational plans for the post-war era in the North. She's a leader. She's an amazing woman. She is now in DC along with her daughter and a few other teammates, meeting with decision makers, with senators, with congressmen and congresswomen from both parties, Democratic and Republicans, and hoping to bring the situation of the North, of the residents of the North that are being evacuated, that have been evacuated for a long, long time, to the decision table. And she's a true leader and she's a true inspiration for me. And I would really love that more people would know her.
Well, we had her on the show.
Yeah.
We had her on the show a few months ago, speaking about the North. We were super impressed. And this is the woman who's going to be, along with her friends, rebuilding the North. And she's going to do it bigger and better. That's what I love about her.
Not just that, she's the example of the leaders we need in this country for the next couple of years to rebuild and do things better and bigger. And
we love her. We love her. Thank you. That's a fantastic hero.
Wonderful.
So my hero is somebody that many of us know. He's an ordinary person.
Okay.
His name is Eric Rubin. And the reason why he's my hero this week is because this morning I started my day with another NBA player that he's brought to Israel. He has not only been bringing influential sports people to Israel already for a number of years, but he put his money where his mouth is. He made Aliyah. He immigrated
on
to Israel
October 15th.
On October 15th.
Yeah.
And continues incessantly to bring influencers in the sports world, incredible people. And the reason why he's my hero is because this morning I had the privilege of walking in with this wonderful guy called Josh Powell, who's an retired NBA player. And we walked into a neighborhood school in my neighborhood. And this guy was a hero. And the kids were surrounding him. And they were shouting and he was signing autographs. And I said to his wife, to Josh's wife, I said, you don't know what this does to these kids. In a very difficult moment, people forget we're at war. There are sirens. People are seeing their brothers and their uncles go to war. And for this guy, Josh Powell, who's also a hero, to come here in the middle of this war, but for Eric to never give up on bringing people to see the reality of Israel, he's my friend. But this week, he's also my hero.
That is so lovely.
And they are going tomorrow to see the South as well.
Exactly. And that's what they do. This is the tour that they do for better and deeper understanding.
Yes.
And so on that happy and positive note, we say goodbye to you one more week. If you like our show, please like and subscribe to JNS TV and watch the Quad every week. And we pray this week, as we do every week, that our hostages come home and that their families keep having strength and that, amen, they will be here celebrating with us very soon. Amen. Thank you for watching the show.